All right, folks, welcome back to Mike and Maurice's Mind Escape. We have episode number 51 today, the Younger Dryas Impact with George Howard. George is a co-author. Hold on a second here. We're getting some sort of feedback here. Let me, sorry about that.
No, that's okay.
George is a co-author of the Younger Dryas Impact Hypothesis, and he is a environmental business entrepreneur. And welcome, George.
Hey, thanks a lot, Mike and Maurice. Good to be with you.
Thanks for coming on.
Yeah, like guys that are willing to ask some of the hard questions about science and history.
We love this shit. This is our cream of the crop shit right here. But why don't you talk about first what the Younger Dryas Impact, was, like what you've done with the Comet Research Group and all that stuff, and we'll go from there.
Yeah, it's a twisted tale, but I won't bore you with every bit of it. It's got several different threads, but essentially I have kind of an interesting posture of being probably more like you guys and some of your viewers and other people that do a lot of, pajama research, if you will. But I'm kind of a king pajama researcher because I got swept up with the actual credentialed scientists a long time ago, going on 20 years ago, and actually was in contact with the lead author of a very critical paper that y'all probably come across in 2007, which set off what I refer to as the modern debate about the long-standing claims that 13,000 years ago there was a tremendous catastrophe that caused dramatic climate change in the northern hemisphere. That's all well documented, that part of it, and well understood. Well, I won't say well understood, but well documented that there was a climate crash that began a period 1,200 years long, much colder conditions in the northern hemisphere and probably altered conditions in the southern hemisphere, but much colder in the northern hemisphere for nearly 1,200 years. So that's been common knowledge in science and the subject of a tremendous amount of research for 50 or 60 years. What came in 2007 was the startling claim made by 27 co-authors, of which I was fortunate to be one of, that we actually found physical evidence that indicates that a cosmic impact initiated the cold period, and that Earth wasn't a closed system that had some freak moment within itself that caused the climate crash, but it was actually an impact, possibly into the ice sheet, possibly involving atmospheric and also ground impacts, but of such a violent and energetic nature that it shut down the Gulf Stream, amongst other things, including a nuclear winter-like atmosphere for many years that led to a lot of varying ecological and cultural consequences, many of which are well understood, many of which are mysteries, but particularly the loss of all the megafauna in North America and actually over parts of the Western Hemisphere, where more than 250 species, 52 different genera of animals over 50 kilograms species were completely wiped out, but not in an instant. But their demise was initiated, if not, someone involved after some human predation, initiated their ultimate decline within a few decades, and all those animals died. So that's a long answer. I got involved with it in 2000. I can give you more background on that, but I'll open it up for a little bit of questions if y'all will lead it. But I'm just fortunate to be I think I referred to you before we got on the cast, Mike, is kind of like being the ball boy for the Los Angeles Lakers or something. They let you come on the bus, you get to sit up front. It's just a great place for a fan to be, and I'm sure y'all can appreciate that as people that are interested in cutting edge science. So
I think you're a little bit better than a ball boy. I mean, I've read your blog and all your stuff. You've done a lot of research. I mean, there's a lot of people that claim to be more that do far less, so I wouldn't worry about that. But as far as what was the catalyst that started this whole hypothesis, like what was the one thing that they found that started this whole speculation, that other than the knowing that about the great floods and glacial dam breaks, all that stuff?
No, it's an excellent question. And it kind of starts, again, since I was involved with this so intimately, I think what I have to share is some of the kind of original progress of it, because I saw it. And there are plenty of good answers that'd be very short. In 2007, 23 scientists published a paper that found evidence of extraterrestrial materials at archaeological layers, but it was preceded before 2007 by an interesting character named William Topping, who contacted me in 1999, and I was researching a phenomenon known as the Carolina Bays that may or may not be related to the impact. And that proposed, at least the Carolina Bay impact hypothesis of the time, proposed that they were secondary features from a tremendous cataclysm over the Midwest 13,000 years ago. And William Topping, independently, not knowing of the Carolina Bays or any of that, was an archaeologist, and he discovered at a site that he was associated with in Gainey, Michigan, up where you guys are from.
Sure.
The Gainey site, right on the edge of the ice sheet, that if you went down through the strata and took a damn good look at that Clovis layer, that last layer before the Younger Dryas was initiated and the first American Paleo-Indian culture was snuffed out and all the animals were snuffed out, if you went and looked at that soil layer microscopically, you found interesting things. Okay, so he contacted he was wanting to do elemental analysis on those little bits he was finding, spherules, magnetic spherules, silicon.
It's like the micro diamonds and that kind of stuff? Or?
It got to diamonds 7 or 8 years later, but it started with things that were visible, barely visible in optical microscopes. Then they quickly went to transmission electron microscopes and elemental analysis that Dr. Firestone was eminently capable of doing. And I remember, to be frank, and I hope somebody goes and tells me a lot more about him one day as the science gets more popular, but Topping was a real nut. And he's an interesting archaeologist and was into a lot of things. And Firestone kind of grounded him. He contacted Firestone. And Firestone,
it was like he was into like controversial type stuff, or just?
Well, it wasn't controversial yet, but it set off a controversy.
Gotcha.
And he was probably on the psychotic spectrum a little bit, I've even heard. But I hate to accuse him of that because he had a genius insight. And that was that if you looked at those soils closely enough, you might find something. Now, that might be the start of a really kooky idea that doesn't deserve being discovered by somebody of questionable,
I don't know. Some of the best geniuses are a little questionable.
Yeah, there you go, man.
Tesla was in love with a pigeon. I mean, look at this.
I was going to say that.
That's right. So he contacts Topping, and then he had sent me some emails on this stuff, and I think we're corresponding. But then all of a sudden, I get an email from Dr. Richard Firestone, whose address was 1 Cyclotron Drive.
Jesus.
Yeah, Berkeley, California, at the Lawrence Berkeley National Nuclear Laboratory.
Nice.
He said, "Hey, I'm in touch with this guy Topping too." And we were Googling around, or at the time it had been AltaVistine or something like that, pre-Google.
Right.
It said that we found a paper that you put out on the web, which I had done a year or two before, suggesting that there was a tremendous cataclysm 13,000 years ago, and it might be reflected in the Carolinas by these subtle features. And we are hypothesizing that 13,000 years ago, there was a tremendous cataclysm over the Midwest. So they kind of independently saw that there were other people, and actually more important than it wasn't my hypothesis. What I was doing was sharing the work that went back to the 1930s on these features called Carolina Bays, which incidentally, I should say right now, do not play a part of the modern theory. Okay, and we can go into that in some depth, but I hope not to. But it is part of my personal story, and that's what I'm sharing. So the Firestone said, and we're interested in this. Will you cooperate, or do you have anything to share and whatnot? So I kind of got involved with it, and then him and Topping published a paper in 2001 in a small but well-respected journal called the Mammoth Trumpet about paleo cultures. And I was excited to see that paper. I'd been in touch with these 2 researchers and was, excited to see them actually publish something as controversial as what we had been claiming on the internet. But it had some flaws in it. And it probably went more to Robert Schoch's hypothesis that there was a solar flare. And we can talk about that more if you like.
Yeah, the mass coronal ejection or whatever.
Yeah, which unfortunately, really neat idea, and probably just as shocking as the other idea that it was a impact of a solid body. But unfortunately for Schoch, the evidence just doesn't support that the forensic evidence of this indicates an impact, not a solar flare. Although you certainly can't rule out associated phenomena, but it might make things more complicated to do so. So they came out, and it was based on an irradiation type event, et cetera. And I think that was more Topping's, that's where he was coming from. He's an isotopic scientist and a radiation scientist and whatnot. And I think that that's where he went. But then in 2005, those two teamed with another two great researchers, Dr. Jim Kennett, who's in the National Academy of Sciences, and is actually considered the father of paleoceanography.
Wow.
Okay, and he's approaching 80 now, but was one of the first people to look back through deep ocean sediments and see changes in climate, and also had, just a wide range of involvement in the early theories about the Younger Dryas. Okay, and was on the original papers, in fact, with another great scientist named Wallace Broker, that determined that the Younger Dryas had something to do with the Gulf Stream shutting down. So that's a great guy to join what was at that time a kooky theory. So Kennett and Dr. Alan West, a dear friend of mine who's a private geoscientist and had worked in oil and gas and other industries for years, him, Firestone, and Kennett got together and said, let's revive this 2002 paper, or at least this investigation. They didn't know they were going to be going to a paper. And Alan had to answer your question, Mike, your original question. Alan had a great insight. You could say it's a stroke of genius, that he could go to existing well-dated archaeological sites that displayed beyond a doubt, and well agreed with all scientists and all of the people involved in those necessary disciplines, that this site shows soil from 13,000 years ago, right? So if because of the artifacts that were there, or whatever they might be finding, it could be paleontological, it might be mammoth remains, whatnot. It's 13,000 years, and that's from carbon-14 dating, and it's at that time. And take a closer look at the soil, and actually look at that soil layer under transmission electron microscopes, and do other elemental probing and forensic investigations, and see whether there's a different nature in that soil. And indeed, it was, just as Topping had suggested, but it was much more abundant than even he was finding. And they found it at site after site. That came together, and I was in touch with them. I was glad to see, West, and thrilled to see Kennett and West get involved with my two other buddies from a few years before. And then Topping kind of phased out about that time. But then it built up and culminated in 2007 with a series of presentations, and then later in the year, a paper in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Science, but a series of presentations at the American Geophysical Union's, I think it's kind of their hemispheric conference in Acapulco. So we went down to Acapulco, presented all this stuff. I had a little part on the bays, and other people presented on the geochemistry and whatnot that was found in those archaeological sites, and it caused quite a sensation. And actually, there's a little golden period for about 2 years there, as public interest was building, public awareness was building, mainstream acceptance by the media was there, and we had a tiger by a tail with a great new story of Earth. Unfortunately, it turned the other direction, and the critics came lurking out of the shadows with their clubs and beat the hell out of us, in all manner of ways. And I had spent 6 years working in the U.S. Senate, directly involved in high-level U.S. politics in the most nasty fashion. And it doesn't even compare to what we saw happen with the Academy when this theory was published, and they had time to get their
scientists are vicious. They
why are they poo-pooing it so bad? They just they don't want to change the textbooks, or
yeah. And we all know that old canard about changing the textbooks, but boy, it embodies a whole lot of stuff. It's absolutely true that and you can't half blame people, but at some point, it's okay. Initial skepticism, and even pushback, and even harsh criticism, if warranted, is to be expected when you have a paradigm-breaking theory. But it went beyond that. And and I've done a couple of podcasts. I try to stay out of it because I do a lot of the pointing out those unfair days, and to the extent that it continues, on my blog. And there are other things we can talk about to educate your folks than how it wasn't well received. But it's come roaring back in a lot of ways. And we're winning the day by far now. So it's been.
Well, it wasn't the recent Hiawatha, Greenland. Obviously, I don't think they've been able to date it, but there is some suggestions based on the formation on the bottom that it could be relatively newer as opposed to being a lot older.
Yeah, it's almost prima facie evidence. I mean, any glaciologist, worth his salt, I would suppose, because they certainly had the greatest team in the world that found that crater. To give your listeners a little background, what Mike's referring to is this November 2018, I think it was the 15th, there was a blockbuster paper published in Science that vindicated potentially a lot of what I've been talking about in those previous papers I've been discussing, and helped turn the worm, if you will, on the controversy. There are a lot of examples of how it, improved things, and how controversial the Younger Dryas hypothesis is within the discovery. For instance, the blockbuster paper that came out in Science and then was accompanied, it's kind of important if people want to go look at this stuff, you can go look at the original, paper with citations and, the formal paper, but then Science Magazine, as they do, which is the premier science platform in the world, accompanied it with 2 wonderful narrative articles explaining how it all came to be. So that was a big, big day. Kind of fortunately and interestingly, I was aware of it months and months ahead of time, because like I say, I got my ear to the ground really well on this subject. And I was given a heads up close to a year before the announcement that the Danes had found this crater in Greenland. And again, for your listeners that might not be familiar with this obscure topic, what was discovered in November was a 20-mile wide, fresh, perfectly formed impact crater that apparently occurred within recent times geologically. Now, when you go and do time bands, and say, well, what's recent geologically? Well, this one's kind of convenient. It could not be older than 3 million years old. Okay. And it could be as young as 12,000 years old, but all of the indications and kind of common sense, when you look at what happened, there's only 13,000 years or 10,000 years of ice above the crater remaining. Does that make sense? Yeah. Greenland's covered by roughly 110,000 years of ice. So it's like a cake with a bunch of layers in it. Well, those Danish scientists that found this crater, and I'll talk about the methods that they used, and NASA as well, it was a NASA and the Danish Natural History Museum co-effort, that those guys are experts in that cake. They know that cake. They've been studying those 110,000 years of ice across their country's province over there, their entire careers. What they noticed in this place was not only was there a gigantic bowl-shaped feature larger than Paris or Washington, D.C., that was just as clear of a large impact crater as exists anywhere on Earth. It's the best example of that because it was so young. Craters erode over time. The Earth is very, very hard on those kinds of features over geological time. So that's why they're sometimes hard to spot if they're old. They knew that there was only 10,000 layers on top of it, not 110,000, right? Because something slammed into the 110, or at that time 100,000 layers, vaporized them, and there was a 20-mile bowl of molten rock for some time afterwards until it cooled off enough to start accumulating ice again, as well as receiving the advance of ice that slowly moves off of the Greenland ice sheet itself. So it's kind of pouring into it and also advancing on it. And literally within the science paper, it's great stuff. Any non-technical person could appreciate it if they read it fairly carefully. They actually show you those layers in the ice, and then show you how they're highly modified and only the youngest ice remains above the purported crater.
Do you think? I got a question. So. Yeah. Compared to the crater that they say wiped out the dinosaurs in the Yucatan.
Yeah.
Does it matter where these impacts are happening? Like if it happens in the desert, it can blow all that shit into the atmosphere, causing a long, long period of blocking out the sun, transforming, the planet. Would an impact this large have the similar impact like that in terms of blowing shit into the air? Or is it something that it melted the ice, causing all the floods that way, or what's the?
Yeah, no. Remember, these things are so energetic that you almost can't get your brain around it, right? The target doesn't make a whole hell of a lot of difference, in my understanding, unless it's ocean or land. If you've got a couple of miles of seawater, you're going to have a different ejecta composition. But if you're on land, you're going to get some kind of basement rock is going to explode into the air and vaporize and also remain molten in that hole, just as it would any other place on the earth, is pretty much my understanding. So if it happens in the desert or it happens on ice. Now, ice, of course, is going to change the nature of it somewhat. There's a lot of study that needs to be done on that, because until we proposed in 2007 that the 13,000 year event, the Younger Dryas event, might have occurred on the ice cap. See, the finding of the Hiawatha Crater was completely in agreement with what we've been claiming for the 12, 13 years. In fact, it's completely analogous, almost spookily so, with the impact that you just mentioned, the Chicxulub impact and the Yucatan that did in the dinosaurs, right? Well, that was first proposed in 1980, just as our thing was first proposed in 2000. You're saying we see physical evidence
Right.
that there was a change in the rock strata at this time. Now, remember, that's 63 million years ago.
Right.
Our thing's 13,000 years ago, so it's roughly 4,000 times more recent.
And the Hiawatha's 20 miles, you said? How big is
That's
the,
right.
the
20
dino-
miles wide.
How big is the one in the Yucatan, do you know?
Now, like 120, something like that.
Okay, so it would have been like 100 or whatever, 100 times bigger, 50 times bigger, whatever.
Yeah.
In terms of, do you think that had, okay, so let's just say that the one that wiped out the dinosaurs, this current one, the Hiawatha one, compared to that, maybe did half as much damage, or fifth, 10th, whatever you want to say, would it still have as much of an impact? Like if the humans that were alive, we know that there's markings, carvings, ancient cultures. We found Göbekli Tepe. There's all sorts of weird stuff going on. Maybe they were looking for high ground. Maybe they were looking for dry places, but in terms of how much of an impact, or how long do you think that period or that time period lasted where it was bad after the impact for something the size of a Hiawatha?
Yeah, well, we know we know there's a 1,200 year cold snap.
Oh, okay.
Right, and that's that Younger Dryas period, which is an awkward name, but it's also kind of handy because it doesn't get confused with anything else. If you type the word younger and then DRYAS in the internet, you're only going to get one subject.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And again, that's well established. There was even it's been popularized. Al Gore spoke of it in his presentations, and remember the movie The Day After Tomorrow,
right,
where New York freezes over in an instant. That was an entirely sensationalized popularization of the well-established science that climate went completely to hell.
Right.
Within the time span of human culture, perhaps not culture. Well, that gets into another debate, but it was certainly witnessed by humans and endured by humans, that 1,200 year period. So the question is, again, that's well established. We found forensic evidence at all the archaeological sites, including a black mat layer, just like the KT boundary where the comet did in the dinosaurs. Right. Now, that had been entombed in rock because it had been 63 million years, 64 million years, whatever it is. And this is still soil. Gotcha. Theoretically, you can have it in your backyard. Most backyards don't grade over an even pattern archaeologically. Those are special sites. But
so if you went deep enough, you could find this layer.
It could have eroded at places. Okay. It's not always, the landscape doesn't quite work like the cake's not always building perfectly.
Gotcha.
Some places where the cake is pristine. And if you can find a grading archaeological soils that you can dig back through, you're going to hit that point where interesting things happen. First, you find the last evidence of the first Paleo-Americans, first well-substantiated, well-understood, very significant Paleo-Americans called the Clovis people that make a particular point. Looks just like that. That's the type point for Clovis. That's not a real one. I wish I had a big one like that, but that's actually plastic. And those points proliferated through the Americas, from Seattle to Miami to Tierra del Fuego within 200 years. And then they all blink out. You don't find that point anymore. And it's replaced, roughly several hundred years later. It starts being replaced with the different technologies, as you call them, different approaches to point making. So something very dramatic happened to those people at that time. At that same point in history, you lose all the megafauna. Everything from your, giant ground sloth to your saber-toothed tiger to the American camel to the iconic woolly mammoths and the mastodons. All of that goes extinct in that same period. So when you're digging down through those soils that we're just discussing, that's the last Indian point you're going to find. And it's the last, well, it's the first Indian point you're going to find. And it's the last mammoth tusk you're going to find.
You've been to these sites, right? These mammoth sites?
Yeah. What about, have I been to them? You said?
Yeah.
Have I been to a mammoth site? Yeah, I actually have one on some land that my company owns in Texas that's undisclosed right now that I've visited with some very senior folks. Let's see, where have I have not been out to Murray Springs or what I've done some traveling with the group. Most of my traveling actually went to the Middle East with them.
Gotcha.
That was my mammoth search. But no, I stayed there. You might be referring because I have a tusk. I have a very large
right.
That's why my blog is called The Cosmic Tusk. And that was offered to us by a fossil company called Canada Fossils in Calgary Fossils, I think. And it had been in a National Geographic episode that was covering the findings during that period. I said it was a nice little honeymoon.
Yeah.
2007 to 2010 before the trolls came out.
Right.
They did did probably 8 or 9 hours of international television, everything from a Nova that you can find on the Cosmic Tusk that actually just put up there from YouTube. I'm sure they'll take it down any day. To National Geographic Explorer and History Channel specials. There were a bunch of them. There've been a couple even since then. But I think we're going to see a resurgence in TV in the next year. Because the Hiawatha Crater discovery was so dramatic that it's going to drive a lot of science TV itself. Now it's going to be, take some mobilization time to get to Greenland. They're going to, and I imagine there'll be sponsorships for further scientific activities. The one that was done up there was sponsored by Carlsberg Beer, of all things. Actually paid for the Hiawatha science. Because it was such a radical proposal anyway that they couldn't get regular science funding. But they certainly got regular science coverage. Back to that Science Magazine article in November. Their paper, though, does not cite, a big part of scientific publications is citations of other people's work that you have relied on or that might have some implications on what you're adding to the basket of knowledge, right? Well, the Younger Dryas Impact hypothesis was tremendously relevant to what they were publishing, that they had found a crater. We have on pretty good authority, and this is third hand for me, but it certainly makes sense and adds up, and there's even the science reporter who reported it suggested as much, that not only did the group that published the finding of the Hiawatha Crater have to endure 27 separate reviewers on that paper.
Wow.
Over 2.5 years. And these were extremely qualified scientists from NASA and from, nation leading, research institutions. They gave them that much hassle to put into science that they had found an absolutely clearly obvious crater candidate under the ice. 27, and as part of those 27 reviews, they struck every reference to our work. So they couldn't cite our 2007 paper.
Gotcha.
Because it's never been allowed in science. We actually publish in other venues, including the equally prestigious proceedings of the National Academy of Science, right? So we never had too much of a problem not getting in science, but it is offensive. And now they go and publish something that vindicates us, but don't let the people who are writing the paper even reference us. But I'll take what I can get. Finding Hiawatha was wonderful. And then, excuse me, if you will, if I may, those accompanying articles about the discovery, one of them was completely about how it relates to our publication. So the narrative portion, the magazine part of science, the easy reading, really gave us our due. And the author there was a guy named Paul Vusen, who I followed on Twitter, and really seems to be a cool guy. And there seems to be a generational change happening in science.
You think so?
Or you couldn't get these catastrophic publications that suggested, significant catastrophes in the past, world catastrophes, just couldn't get published, and probably still can't. But at some point, the evidence overwhelms the resistance. So I've been talking a lot. What questions you got, fellas?
Well, I was just gonna say, why do you think? I mean, look, I love science, but yeah, I think that there is some sort of, I don't even know what it is. It's just like, it's almost like a God complex on their end of things. Like, I'm smart enough, I'm going to find the answer, and I'm going to use the scientific method to arrive at this answer. And the thing is that gets me is they all fight with each other, though. So it's like, who are we supposed to believe when they're all infighting? I got a better theory. This is my theory. This is my theory. And then you have people like you getting your hands dirty a little bit and trying to push this agenda, and other people like Randall Carlson doing stuff and Graham Hancock talking about it, all this stuff. Why do you think that there's that much pushback? Just because there isn't the official merits and degrees and all that stuff? And if so, it's like, I just don't understand it, why they wouldn't even look at it if the evidence was there.
Yeah, well, it's human nature. And I think you've got to remember what you're seeing is the biggest pushback comes from the biggest boneheads, right? So when we published this, it took about 3 years. They published a paper called The Younger Dryas Hypothesis, a Requiem.
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
It's a celebration, of someone's death, or recognition of it. Just a horrible kind of thing. Okay, what causes that? I think, science is driven by curiosity, but at some point, the accumulation of facts and curiosity becomes perverted into the protection and defense of the known, where they take the posture of defending what's known rather than investigating what is unknown with a curious mind. And the people who have come out against us, and it is a little cabal, okay? And they have published time and time again, and I won't bore you with the names. I can give you some of them. They're all profiled on the Cosmic Tusk. But that same cabal, their interest seems to be defending the known, not describing what caused the Younger Dryas.
Gotcha.
They're there to tell you that we know that there was no gigantic impact 13,000 years ago because science is so smart we would have found it yet. Okay, now, if anyone understands the history of science, you know that there are things at any given time you're absolutely dead wrong about some stuff.
Yeah, most things.
Yeah, wrong until you're right, man.
Even Newton, Newton and, all that.
You're going to be dead wrong about at any given time, the accumulated body of accepted knowledge is to some significant degree absolutely dead wrong. So the way I kind of, in my mental game with these folks, I know they cause you frustration too, is every scientist should have at least one kooky theory he believes in.
Sure.
If you don't have one kooky theory going, that means that you think everything is right and there's nothing that might be anomalous, that might be instructive, that you need to be running down. Right? They quickly become defenders of the known. And
that's the vibe it's like a depressing vibe I get from most scientists. Like, I'm on Reddit, I get in debates, I ask questions, I'm just trying to learn, and through learning, I'm not just gonna like take somebody at their word if I know something to be different,
Right.
So when I do that, they get very defensive, they get very shitty. Not all of them. There's some cool ones. We're gonna have some cool ones coming up on our podcast soon. There's definitely cool scientists.
Be careful, bro. Be careful.
But at the same time, there is like an agenda too, and even most scientists that are reasonable will point that out. Like, we do debate each other, and it is eating our young. We eat our young, and blah 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 blah.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I think you're right. I think the fact that most of these scientists don't believe in anything metaphysical could even be a possibility. Stuff like that. You hear it in their tone when they talk. This is how it is, and this is what it is, and it's just, and once in a while you'll get somebody that's, got good charisma that pushes it, in that direction and stuff. But I can't listen to like a Richard Dawkins or a Lawrence Krauss. I mean, as smart as they may be and accomplished as they may be, it just their tone alone and what they're saying is just, it's just too much for me to listen to.
The whole skeptic movement, just became perverted.
Yeah.
I don't know if y'all followed that. I'm older than you are, but when it started with James Randi back in the early 80s, and he would go debunk things, and particularly junk science, there was a lot to that. That was a wonderful thing.
Right.
And it turned into a pathological attack of political enemies, a combination between politics and science, and again, defense of the known at all costs.
Well, you know about both. I mean, you've been involved with politics and you've been involved with science.
I have. It helps bring me to it. And I said that, like I said, the science is just awful. Every bit as bad as politics. But the good news is, and I've listened to some of your podcasts, and you get a little morose at times, guys. You gotta stay. This is a pressing subject, so everyone is forgiven. Okay, but the good news is, we're going to win this thing.
All right.
No doubt in my mind. And being somebody that has watched it so closely, unlike a football game like we have tonight, you can know enough to know who's going to win in this game.
Sure.
Yeah.
A lot that's unstated. There's a lot that's unpublished. You've seen the way the other side has had to lie. For instance, if you know you're right about something, then you know. For instance, one particular guy, a federal scientist, former federal scientist at Sandia Labs, Mark Boslow, is our prototypical antagonist for this paradigm change. He is absolutely 100% set against it and has pulled every trick in the book to undermine us. Oh, hell, I forgot what I was going to say about the guy.
He's so evil. He's so
evil. Just work. I don't want to say anybody's evil. I'm sure.
No.
It's in my wallet, you know. But I wouldn't trust him with, you know, the intellectual future of these disciplines that our theory reflects, because it is multidisciplinary. And talking about how you know what's going to come, the thing has been so predictive. To have them find the Hiawatha Crater, again, we included in the original hypothesis, and I say we loosely. I do not speak for the group, and I should have said that right off the bat. No one truly speaks. I would say those lead authors could, and I would certainly, you know, respect them speaking for me anytime. But the ball boy doesn't speak for the Lakers, right?
Sure.
Okay, so yeah, and that gives me a lot of intellectual freedom. If I had to speak with them, I couldn't go on and speak for them about Graham Hancock and whatnot, who those folks have no interest in whatsoever.
Right.
Some do, most don't. Okay, and that's kind of an important part of this whole thing we should probably delve into, that this is it's a great kooky theory, and I'm glad that you guys are picking up on it. By kooky theory, I mean that lighthearted, you know.
Sure.
It's supposed to be, out of the mainstream, but it's the best one. You're on the safest ground that there is. It has the highest consequence with the most truth and the most illegitimate pushback, that if you take that formula, it's the best gig out there.
Sure.
Yeah.
Right. And that's the Younger Dryas Impact hypothesis. Somebody finally came up with one that shakes it to the bone, proves Plato, suggests perhaps that the Atlantis stories could be true. You at least got your catastrophe down. You know, it makes you got to look back at precursor civilizations again, or at least take it more seriously than it has been today. It opens up a Pandora's box that nobody wants to open up. Now, can it keep it open? A lot of theories can't keep the box open. You know, it shuts back, it goes in and out. You're not publishing regularly. Remember, this stuff is going to the major journals in the world. You don't see a whole lot of Bigfoot papers in major journals. You know?
Right.
Yeah. And in fact, I'll give you a good little analogy.
Bigfoot's like the one thing for me. I like to believe things if there is something there, you know? Bigfoot's like the one thing I haven't been able to find. Maybe I've had a theory, we've talked about this, that maybe, and I've heard other people talk about this though too. Maybe it's ingrained in our DNA, like seeing this Gigantopithecus a long time ago, and it's just this flash.
You have a primordial fear of
something. Just like how I think about like an alien could be us in the future, like that could be us evolved, and we're just seeing some sort,
for whatever reason they were all extinct, we would still have the snake fear embedded in us, because that's embedded in people.
Yeah.
That's,
little kids, for some reason, there's some thing about little kids being scared of snakes. It's pretty interesting.
Right. So, where do you want to head with it, fellas?
I was just, like I said, the Bigfoot thing was like the one thing I can't,
Yeah. Well, it's just rich. It's fun when you research this hypothesis, it can take you all the way into some of the craziest claims of all time. And it can take you all the way to Science Magazine in November of 2018.
Sure.
That's that's a rich subject, and it's only going to get better, because that crater ain't going anywhere. It's not like some fast radio burst that you can't go check again.
Do they have
it's not a thing. It's sitting up there and it ain't going anywhere.
Do they have an agenda or something on the docket to go do more research on this, or is there what's going on with that?
Excellent question. No, I think it's absolutely obvious that there is going to be further research. This was a huge discovery. Everyone indicated that there are ways to test and to narrow the dates, with great precision. But of course, it's in Greenland. It's under a mile of ice.
Sure.
You got to dig through it. So there is clearly prep for that going on. I say clearly because it would just be too weird if there wasn't. Okay, but it's all secret right now. They're in grant application processes. I know no details, but they are working to gather the funding and the technical support to get back up there and test it again. It wouldn't surprise me at all if you didn't get some media funding too. It's a good story that you could get Nat Geo up there, maybe picking up some chopper bills, you know?
What would be the techniques? Do you know anything? Like, would they do like core sampling or somehow drill down like a small cylinder?
Try to get the reconstituted molten rock, right?
Okay.
And then date it radiometrically.
Gotcha.
And you can see that, you know, like if you go see that basalts, you know, came from a volcano and that rock reformed itself 3 billion years ago or whatnot. Apparently they can do the same thing as long as you had rock turned back into. That's one approach. Okay. There's also members of our team. I don't think I'm disclosing anything improper here, but I did hear some stuff I hadn't seen on the internet that members of our team had suggested that apparently within the ice itself, the Greenland constituents of the Greenland ice sheet is a plankton record. Okay, because you constantly have winds blowing in diatoms and plankton and, you know, microscopic creatures from the sea, etc. And you can find that. You can also, these days, you can date that stuff. So you would go down and find the very first living thing that occurred in the ice above it.
Damn.
Wow.
Right? And at least then, maybe that ends up, maybe it's 5,000 years of it being a smoking crater and nothing's left, and the first thing pops up 6,000 years ago. You would know the youngest, as long as you didn't find anything 110,000 years old, you knew that was all fresh stuff.
Right.
Right. So that's a old-fashioned carbon-14 dating. You can also, you know, maybe they could use what you call optically stimulated luminescence, OSL dating, which can show you a given sand grain or a grain of quartz the last time it was exposed to the sun. Those kind of techniques can be employed. Interestingly enough, again, Carlsberg, what is it? Carlsberg? Yeah, Carlsberg Beer funded the
Right.
trip they did. And they had the telemetry. The way they found this thing is the Greenland ice sheet is very well studied. Even the scientists, usually you don't find a lot of scientists that will say, they don't say we have all the funding we need, but these guys seem to say, we've really been on this for a long time. They've been flying radar over that thing for 20 years.
Wow.
They're bouncing radar waves off of the bedrock, right?
Sure.
So I think 3 or 4 years ago, when they got some of the latest equipment, they revealed to the world a map of the pre-ice sheet Greenland that had big canyons in it, like the Grand Canyon and river valleys, and all of that has been revealed beneath the ice. But that same radar beam that can give you accurate topography of the subsurface rock can also provide you the constituents of the sheet. You can actually see the layers of the cake. So
Gotcha.
You're getting the bottom and you're getting the year layers. And within that, you can actually see the Younger Dryas. So this is a good way to actually, should have said it earlier when I was explaining the cake thing, but they can tell where the 110,000 years of ice, 13,000 years ago, it changes dramatically 13,000 years ago. And you see that all across Greenland. Well, you get to this crater and you don't see it anymore because it is the change.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Right? That was the thing that caused the slice everywhere else in the cake.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's again, that's all stuff, and you can see what happened. So they come back with this data, and they explain it in great dramatic fashion, and there are a couple of great videos that NASA itself did explaining this, that even referenced the Younger Dryas Impact hypothesis, which was just unthinkable a couple of years ago, seeing the mainstream gather on this. So they show the videos and dramatize the scientists coming back with some of the first, passes over this area and going, good God, there's a remarkable feature under the ice. This is like nowhere else in Greenland. We don't see that this is a perfectly shaped bowl. And strangely enough, and again, this is well dramatized, they even recreated for some of these things. The announcement videos had recreations in them. But at the Danish Museum of Natural Science, where the Danes that are working on this work,
Right.
they have a large iron meteorite in their courtyard that came from Greenland.
Wow.
So they were sitting there thinking, well, could it be an impact in Greenland? And they look out in their courtyard and there's a gigantic 5 tons of iron that came from Greenland. Well, yeah, it can happen, It's
a lot of good evidence. Where's all this evidence against this stuff?
Oh, I'll tell you, one of the most painful ones was in 2010. We had there's a certain, along with seeing magnetic grains, that have some kind of metal in them, obviously iron content, and silicate grains. And then we're talking very, very small, several nanometers, and then some a little bit bigger. These things that have been melted and re-quenched bedrock, right? That's what you find. It's a vapor that's blasted up out of the hole, and that vapor falls down and has fallen all across North America and well into Europe, and all our sites extend into Europe, and all the way. The furthest one is in Syria, and a new paper is coming soon. Probably shouldn't say anything, but finding all this stuff in South America too. Okay. You find these reconstituted rock vapor of various types. You also find these interesting little carbonate spherules called carbon spherules.
Okay.
Okay. And you were saying, what would people come out against you? One of the first papers that, probably had a huge effect in other scientists' understanding, because they didn't go look any deeper. They came out and said that all the little carbon spherules that we were looking at were all bug poop.
What?
Species. Yeah.
Like dinosaur bugs or
just that, that it's bug crap from the past of 13,000 years ago. And that now, there is bug crap, and there are these little spores and whatnot and crap, and one of the other kinds is carbonaceous whatchamadoogies, and that is true, but not if you look at it through a transmission electron microscope. You can get past that. When you're at that level in the investigation, when our team reported that, they had been looking at those with some of the most powerful instruments in the world. The other team went and took optical microscope pictures of bug poop and said, hey, this looks like that. So what?
Yeah.
Right.
These things have been, investigated with elemental probes, the highest technical specifications. We were past the bug poop stage. But they come at you with stuff like that. And you didn't find diamonds. We had a diamond expert go and look. Or iridium, for instance. Iridium, it's a tough one because you find it in grains. You can't always find it. Not every bit of the sediment's going to show the iridium. You've got nuggets that have it. Now, where we later kind of put it to bed, I mean, the thing's going very, very well now. We're not getting a lot of pushback. It's now just how do you get it totally mainstream? And the crater is going to do that if it does date to the proper date. I lost my train of thought there.
It's just kind of scary because it's, these people are trying to deprive people of good information. It's fucked up.
Oh, it's horrifying. Yeah. And, again, it just shows kind of one of the darker sides of human nature.
Yeah.
And I think there are a number of subjects that, reflect the same kind of thing that fall in that category for me personally, is having unbelievable published foundational support, but haven't made it over the hump yet.
Sure.
Right.
And my categories, just for the hell of it, to put it on the record, are obviously the Younger Dryas Impact event. I've been involved with it for 20 years, right? But also Panspermia, as defined by Chandra Wickramasinghe, and Fred Hoyle. Clearly published for years, some of the greatest scientists in the world. And it increasingly has the backing it needs to become the paradigm, but the shift is so great to go from saying, which is the most ridiculous presumption since heliocentric, or Earth-centric solar system, that all life came from here and that we invented it on our little planet.
Right.
It's a sterile outside unless we find something exotic, under ice.
Carl Sagan was a huge proponent of directed panspermia and panspermia until later in his career, and something happened.
Academia got a hold of him.
Yeah, maybe that was it. But and then the other thing too is I recently saw something, I forget, it might have actually been on Ancient Aliens, but it was an experiment they did with a weather balloon where they took it up to the tip of the atmosphere where it touches space, and they collected the particles, and they found the building blocks of life are being like rained down on our planet, basically. Now, is it proven? I don't know.
The tardigrade. If you looked up tardigrades.
Oh yeah, the little water bears.
Popular. 5 years ago, no one knew what the hell that is, and you're starting to see under those little bugs, those little water bears exist throughout the galaxy.
They are the aliens.
Well,
evolve some creature that could survive radiation in space. It doesn't need to.
I wonder if that octopus study could.
There There you go.
It validates
The
that
other
stuff.
day, buddy, I remember seeing it come out, and I thought that's great. That, you know, absolutely. As crazy as it sounds, there's a world of octopuses out there, and their DNA is floating around because they got hit by an asteroid, and at some point that stuff gets mixed in, and we've probably got creatures from all over the world whose DNA has been all over
the universe.
Octopus could have came from a comet impact.
But that's a big lift, dude. I mean, again, that's like moving the damn Earth to the outside of the center.
Yep.
In a very analogous fashion, but you're moving our hubris that somehow all this bizarre stuff managed to evolve right here from a hot pool of stuff beside a volcano. Like, I mean, give me a break.
Yeah.
So that's number 2. You got Younger Dryas and Panspermia. Just to give you my big 4. Youth. That David Sinclair at Harvard has licked it. That's a good one because at Harvard, #1 damn longevity researcher in the world, and the nicotinamide and NDA. So it's a youth molecule that he's been on for 5 years now.
Yeah.
He's got resveratrol from red wine. All that stuff's true. My wife and I are taking it now. I'm a believer. I think they have found the youth pill, but it's funny. You're not going to know somebody's found the youth pill because how do you know the next day?
Right.
It doesn't make you any younger. It just keeps you from aging. So you kind of got to wait till all these people taking it look young.
Yeah.
Right? It's not going to be one day that discover the youth pill. So if he has it, it would make sense that it wouldn't be accepted right away because you got to go through all the FDA stuff and whatnot, and it's sold on Amazon. And he doesn't.
Funny.
But yeah,
I was going to say it's funny too because you got a scientist like Brian Cox who was just on Rogan, and they asked him about that octopus investigation, and he immediately said, "No, their DNA is just like ours, and it's just wiped away." And
I missed that. Funny.
Yeah,
it's interesting.
He was talking about it as if he was a biologist that was
Yeah.
debunking. Like, does he know that much about biology? I don't know. Maybe he does. He's a smart guy, but I mean, who fucking knows?
Well, our wonderful friend Joe Rogan, is tuned into so many things and has such a great open mind. Well, he had Sinclair, the guy I just referenced at Harvard.
Yeah.
So I believe that's true, and that's pretty damn mainstream. But it's just not over the hump yet.
Yeah.
Right. Finally, take you to the X-Files. I am an absolute believer in the reality of low energy nuclear reactions and cold fusion. That I think those guys in 1989 got the rawest deal of the kind of raw deals we're discussing. I don't know if y'all are familiar with that, you're younger guys, but in 1989, there was a worldwide, front cover of every magazine, lead of every TV, on, cover of every paper that they had gotten more energy out of a particular electrochemical process than they put in.
Wow.
Y'all aware of that?
No.
Cold fusion is?
No. I mean, I'm aware of like what people think 0 point energy is and like what To the Stars Academy is trying to do and stuff like that. But I'm unaware of what you're talking.
Perpetual motion machine or too much woo.
Yeah.
But, go look that one up. It's called Pons and Fleischmann, where the.
Well, what do you think about that? Because you were part of the government. The government, Harry Reid, the ATIP, $22 million over 7 years. Now Harry Reid's coming back saying, let's get more money. Let's do more research on this. Those videos that came out that, I mean, I don't know what to think otherwise, but I mean, what do you think about at least aliens? Forget about aliens, but just UFOs,
I tell you, it worked with me. That big splash they did in 2017, with Leslie Kean and all of that. I had to go read her book. I had to go look at UFOs again. I hadn't looked at them in 25 years. Maybe longer. I think I left UFOs right around Jaws 3.
Okay.
Like about 1979.
Yeah.
All right.
When I was a kid, like anybody that's interested in anomalous stuff and mysteries like we all are,
right,
of our type, I'm absolutely fascinated. Bought every UFO book there's out there, but slowly just got away from it. Where if I didn't have a belief, I certainly had no interest.
Yeah.
Okay.
But they put it back on the table for me.
Yeah.
Well, 22 million is just so pitifully small.
Well, there's a lot of questions, right? Consciousness, what's consciousness? They can't even tell us what that is. Science wants to go to the furthest reaches and figure out what happened first, the Big Bang or whatever, but they're not even, and that should be looked at, by the way. I'm not saying that shouldn't be, but I don't think that there's enough research going on what's actually happening within our own brains. Like what is consciousness? We've interviewed many people that have taken, I don't know if you're familiar with DMT or dimethyltryptamine.
Good friend of Graham Hancock's, buddy.
Okay, yeah, yes, I forgot. But yeah, so that's, I mean, and in our own experiences, I've experienced some pretty crazy shit myself on psychedelics. But
Well, I know. And, excuse me to interrupt, but I gotta ask because I listened to a couple of y'all's. My buddy RN Voot.
oh, yeah.
When out riding my bike today.
Yeah.
Love RN. I've been his buddy on Twitter for a couple of years. We're trading stuff, and I'd like to talk about his theories a little bit.
Yeah,
But,
Spirit in the Sky. Yeah, he's one of our top guys.
Have you experienced DMT? I didn't want to.
We have never done. I've done everything else.
Yeah, we've all done mushrooms. Yeah, I get.
Well,
that.
no. I mean, I've done. You know, like when I was younger, LSD, mescaline. You know, like all that stuff. So I'm very aware of.
Out there waiting on that first DMT trip. You know, not going out of your way to go get it.
Oh, we're filming it live.
Yeah. That's exactly what it is. What I feel about it is this. It's obviously an endogenous chemical. We all have it within us. That being said, I'm not going to go out of my way to find it. If it finds me and time's right, you know, same thing happened with all the other psychedelics I've done, you know.
Well, it doesn't have to be the time is right. I'm not going to do it and grab a fire extinguisher at the frat house, you know.
Well, we were both musicians too. Like for a long time, I experimented stuff when I'd write music and record stuff.
Rave, you know.
Yeah.
And
well, we're big Fish and Deadheads too, so we're very.
Went to a Fish show in Raleigh, first one I went to this year, and man, it was so much better than I thought it was going to be.
Oh yeah, it's just sick, bro.
I was fired up, you know, but I came out of that thing. I said, "Wow, man, I get it now."
Good time, good energy.
Yeah.
Even in their old age, they're better than anybody else their age. I think. If you look at like old X, you know.
I would.
Yeah.
Yeah. I thought it's going to be, you know, dead minus, and it was dead plus.
Well, we were never old enough to see the dead. I'm 34. Maurice
could have if we were like 7.
Yeah, if we were younger. Maybe the last show at Soldier Field or something in '95. But we're huge. I mean, I'm a huge Dead fan. Maurice is a huge Dead fan. But we're just Fish was the thing that stuck because we could actually go see them and then experience them in their full fury. But back to the consciousness stuff. Yeah, I mean, I've experienced enough synchronicities and things I don't necessarily believe one thing or another, but I do believe that there's something more to all of this. I don't believe that we're just aimlessly evolving, like Richard Dawkins says, where there's no point to anything and we live in a dumb universe and that's just it. Like, I don't subscribe to that, but I mean, everybody's welcome to have their own opinions, obviously.
Yeah, well, the engineering of consciousness apparently has some hidden keys out there, and if somebody had to hide the key,
sure.
And DMT is certainly one of those keys. Again, I speak from someone who hasn't done it and may never do it, but there's a lot going on there. And what I wanted to communicate to RN, and I owe him an email. He actually messaged me because I was going to send him something, and he just circled back to me after a couple of months and said, "You never sent it." And but I went on a very interesting whole nother thread, but archaeological dig 2 years in a row in the Jordan Valley, just north of the Dead Sea.
Okay.
The Dead Sea on the Jordanian side. And it was, it's the increasingly well-established location of Sodom.
Oh, right? Wow.
Tel al-Hammam. And Tel al-Hammam is a cultural tell or tall, as they call them in Jordan, that has experienced 5,000 years of civilization of one sort or another, with the exception of a 700-year period marked by an ash boundary where it was completely abandoned. Okay. And
do they have a rough dating on that of the year that you're talking about?
It's about 3,700, 4,700 years ago, 2,700.
Okay.
It's at the Middle Bronze Age, early Middle Bronze.
So it would have been like by dynastic Egypt.
It would have predated. It was Old Testament times, clearly.
Sure.
Recorded in said Old Testament.
Right. So you think that's the Sodom and Gomorrah site, huh?
Oh man, there is great evidence on it, and that's easy to Google. All the modern information on Sodom and Gomorrah now, and they're out filming the dig this year. In fact, it's underway right now. I hadn't been in 2 years, but went 3 weeks and then 2 weeks. I had some good experience there, and I was there collecting samples for the Younger Dryas research team because the archaeologists working to find Sodom became aware of their forensic capabilities. and then Ball Boy went over there just to grab some samples. They can take them out, right?
Grab them and run, baby.
You got to get a jacket. You got to get a jacket that just says Ball Boy on it.
Yeah, man, I'll have fun with it. So I went over there and gathered samples and all that. Found a huge spike in platinum, just like you find at the Younger Dryas. So it could have been a Taurid object too. And we can talk about the Taurids as you like. But where we're headed with that? The consciousness part of it. That when you find the sterile layer that the place is completely abandoned for 700 years, it is repopulated. This archaeological site, this tall as it was, first of all, in its heyday, and no one had found it till our leader, the director of the dig, Stephen Collins, found it by kind of reverse engineering the genesis. And it was 10 times larger than its mirror city on the other side of the Jordan, which is Jericho. You can see Jericho all day when you're digging. You look out and it's 6 miles to the Jordan, and then 6 miles on the other side is the mirror city. And then both of those talls, so it was Jericho and Sodom, and both sat at the bottom of the hill down in the Great Rift, where the Dead Sea is 1,000 feet lower than the surrounding landscape. With the city on the hill was Jerusalem for Jericho and Ammon for Sodom.
Gotcha.
Okay, but I'm getting a little off track. But in its day, our site was 10 times larger than Jericho, the oldest city in the world, and 100 times larger than Jerusalem. So it was an absolutely dominant force there at Tel El Ammon.
Wow.
Then it goes away for 700 years, and it has the best second act of any archaeological site in the world. And no one even really talked about it on the dig. I was always interested in this part, is that it's well accepted that small area of the Jordan Valley was the last campsite of the Israelites before they sent the raiding party into Jericho.
Wow.
So they came all the way through the wilderness and the 40 years and all that, and that was the last spot. And obviously, it's on the toll. The area there, which isn't 3 miles by 3 miles, is known. And this is where it gets to the R&Voot stuff and DMT, is known as the Field of Acacias.
Yes.
Gotcha.
At El Shatim. That area is known as El Shatim. And then the centerpiece of El Shatim is this hill that you can look up, Tel El Ammon. I might do a screen share with you. It's obvious as hell. It's all culturally built up. There's no structures left at all. It's just a pile of dirt. You dig through the dirt and find the old stuff. So it goes, it was sterile for 700 years, then repopulated by Moses. The Ark of the Covenant, if it existed, definitely sat on the hill, right? But the name, which I've never seen in any of Voot stuff or the spirit molecule or any of that, the name of that area is the Field of Acacias. So when he received Deuteronomy, which supposedly happened in the Field of Acacias,
right?
When he went up and died, went up to the Promised Land, and they got the mosque, for gosh sakes, the basilica or the church or whatever, where he's the Promised Land. It's right there on Mount Nebo. It's over your shoulder when you're digging. I'm going on too long. But he was operating from a place that has been known for 3,000 years as the Field of Acacias. And of course, acacia is from whence, is where you can derive DMT.
Right. The Middle East is rich with acacia. Acacia, I think, has 2% DMT. I know. But I know you couldn't just throw it on a fire and inhale it or smoke it or whatever. You would have to extract it. So like I've listened to Hamilton Morris and Joe Rogan talk about this, where Hamilton Morris is like a chemist. He's got a show called Hamilton's Pharmacopoeia. It's actually a really good show where he breaks down all these chemicals and synthesize them. But he was talking about how it would have to be, extracted. You couldn't trip off that amount of it. So,
and I've heard y'all talk about that on your show as well. But presumably that was not beyond the.
No, no. What would like to extract it? It's actually not. From what I understand, I've never done it, but from what I understand, it's not that complicated of a process. Yeah. So is it out of the realm of possibility? Oh, absolutely not. I think though, you're right though. I mean, that area, even Egypt's rich with acacia. I know they're more the blue lotus, but that whole area over there has got tons and tons of acacia. Same thing with Australia. Australia's got a lot of acacia too. Yeah. I mean, but the thing is mushrooms are everywhere too. So it could have been mushrooms. There's a mural, a fresco from the Middle East. I think it's like
Yeah.
One of the earliest ones, like 7,000 BC, I believe, or no, 7,000 years. So like I think like 4 or 5,000 BC, they found where there's mushrooms on it. So obviously they were picking psychedelic mushrooms, and they know it's a psilocybe mushroom. So,
Well, just without a question, do you know that those substances and those molecules had an effect on those people's spirit life?
Oh, absolutely.
And
They were talking to the gods.
Fire extinguishers either. They were probably taking it all in and commune with nature, running around like you guys do, spinning records and stuff, I mean,
imagine not knowing what the mushroom does and eating like a pound of them. You would have the most intense.
You come up with a religion by the time you were done. Now, whether it catches on is another matter, but you could come up with a religion.
It's like an ancient rave.
Yeah, there you go. There you go. Probably very much was like that, in my opinion. So yeah, I'll just renote, just for the record, my last, speculative of the 4 things that Lewin entered nuclear fusion, guys.
Oh yeah. We got away from. I want to hear what that is.
I want to do a dig on that because I think the day is coming very quickly that things are going to change dramatically in that regard. That there's going to be unlimited energy, and I normally would not say that, but I feel so confident in it that I would say it, and that perhaps it undermines my credibility on some of the other stuff I'm talking about. But I come at it from a sociological perspective, that you can see some of these paradigm changes. You can go find the actors and say, you can tell this is a setup.
Right.
You're onto something, and it's a sociological pushback, not an evidence-based pushback.
Right.
And that happens in all 4 of those fields, from my opinion. Those are the best examples where, that was clearly a setup. The 2 guys who had the set of experiments and announced it to the world, the president appointed a panel. Department of Energy panel went out and got 4 labs to come back to try to reproduce the experiment and report back to President Bush 1. So everybody in the world was waiting on that thing. Came back 6 months later. It was and they said, nope, didn't work.
Mm-mm.
And
Tesla knew some shit.
Well, who did they appoint to do it? There's not a conspiracy here. It's all just human nature. It was the hot fusion labs, the people out with the $1 billion Rube Goldberg machines that have the absolute most to lose.
Right.
The tabletop apparatus works. And it ended up, the implementation of that experiment, much like, it actually has a lot of similarities with the Younger Dryas thing. The Panspermia thing's intimately related with it and even shares some authors. But just from a sociological perspective, the cold fusion thing has a lot related. And it's particularly that, and it sounds a little, picky, but the first people to go reproduce your astonishing results, if they aren't completely open-minded, or God forbid, which is generally the case and was with cold fusion and us, the results are attempted to be reproduced by people who are out and out, could care less about it, that are like negative confirmation bias. You have confirmation bias, you can have the opposite, where you come in and you don't believe anything you see. And they don't follow the protocols and don't contact the scientists. See if the people who tried to reproduce cold fusion had been in proper touch with those first guys and had taken their time and given it several iterations and worked on it some, they'd have gotten the results that the rest of the world's been getting since then to an increasing degree. It's up to 100% now. They can make these things run. They run one at MIT. One of the things that shot it down, they run a cold fusion apparatus there every year, or one particular professor does. But so you got those guys, but they didn't have any interest in seeing the experiment succeed. It doesn't mean they necessarily sank it deliberately, but you got to have a dedication, even when you're trying to reproduce these things, to really run it down. The same thing happened to us. They went and looked for the diamonds, the nanodiamonds, the magnetic spherules, and whatnot, and came back and either said, we misinterpreted, we found it, but these guys misinterpreted it, and here's why. Or they said, we didn't find it at all. And that one was tremendously damaging. And it ends up that the guy never size sorted down the next level that he needed to get down to the 10 nanometer stuff. He was searching through a container full of basketballs for marbles.
Yeah.
You've got to screen out every basketball, right? It was that simple. And I actually confronted the guy about it at a conference in 2010 out in Wyoming, one of the last we went to, because we got so frustrated by him, or the lead scientists do. Again, I don't need to speak for him. But but the fellow Todd Sorvo had done the work. It seems to be a perfectly nice guy, but it would undermine his whole young career if we were right. He admitted that he didn't size sort it, and he's never gone back and done it again and done it properly. He's let it just stand out there.
He still sticks to his opinion, doesn't he?
Yeah, he doesn't have time to go do it. And listen, I disagree with that. I looked at it once, and I don't know what he'd say right now if he got interviewed on it, because there's been so much additional evidence. He's probably having a hard time sticking to his guns over a beer with his fellow, this thing is being increasingly mainstreamed behind the doors of academia. We're winning behind the thing. They're reading the papers. They know we got it. It's going to end up back on TV. That's going to get the public, and it'll turn within the next 5 years. And people will understand that the past of, the Younger Dryas Impact event's kind of the Rosetta Stone of Earth and human history.
Oh,
it's
yeah.
going to be able to unlock a whole bunch of other stuff, and it's going to be fun as hell. And there are going to be implications of it that are gotten wrong and dead ends you run down. But it's going to open up all that stuff. And that's all, I think, coming easily within 5 years, and probably because of Hiawatha within 2 years.
So what's the connection? I know that there's something with we're not far from where we're from, Saginaw Bay, is it?
Yeah, thanks for bringing it up. Yeah.
So what's the deal with that? Is it they found something underwater, or?
Yeah, that's another thing you can find at the Cosmic Tusk, and it's got a little bit of background related to the Carolina Bays, which I say again.
Yeah, we're gonna throw your website up on the information too, so people check it out. Cosmic Tusk.
Your favorite links on your webpage too.
Okay.
Y'all got it. Yeah, so some of the non-credentialed scientists, but very smart people who were intensely interested in the arrangement of Carolina Bays and how they might be secondary impact features, but not primary. In other words, no one has proposed since the 1930s, although we're constantly accused of it, of believing that the bays were a place something slammed into the ground from space. No. There's never been a meteorite found in them. There's been, some of the nanodiamond type stuff, but that could have been just fallout anyway. But nothing directly slammed in it that came in, from space, if you will.
Right.
Okay. What they are to this group who are still interested in trying to run this down in alternative explanations, that they're secondary impact features from something that happened elsewhere. In other words, there was a tremendous impact elsewhere, and it splayed out a bunch of material that later showed itself as these shallow elliptical basins all along eastern North America. Those shallow basins are oriented in a clockwork fashion. So the further you go up the East Coast, the more westerly they point, and the further you go down the East Coast, the more northerly they point.
So is this from like an asteroid or a comet possibly breaking apart in our atmosphere as it's coming down, or?
No, that's been proposed, but as it's gotten refined, and perhaps it's all, incorrect and a folly, is that when you follow those, that it would have been something slammed into the ground and cast the ice that existed there into the atmosphere, if shallow atmosphere, and it lands 800 miles later in North Carolina.
Gotcha. So it's like the stuff that's getting shot out, like the big pieces, not the particles. Okay.
Yeah, blood spatter pattern.
I gotcha.
Secondary thing. You're not the bullet, but you're the blood.
Gotcha.
Right? Okay. And again, I hate to get wrapped up in it because it causes nothing but trouble for the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis, because this stuff is largely speculative, if not entirely speculative, right? But it's connected to the YD, and it was originally in some of our early papers. The evidence is so poor that this happened, even though it's intriguing, particularly to me and these guys who are still working on it. But it was put aside because it just didn't help. I call it the kooky caboose of our theory. It just rocks along attached to us, constantly an embarrassment, right? And I kind of reside there, unfortunately. If they ever have to cut off the kooky, they have cut off the kooky caboose. They want nothing to do with Carolina Bays. And I've kind of got one hand in it and one hand trying to stay with the big guys,
Yeah.
Still stuck with the kooky theory, which I think has some unexplained parts to it. And I remain curious.
Have they ever examine any physical, like have they actually gone and like taken samples or done any of that?
Yeah, for 70 years. Yeah, it's unbelievable pile of papers this tall on it that died off in recent years. The most recent one was more speculation based on math, that each of the bays actually represents a conic section passed through the Earth. Without getting too wrapped in there, to get to your original question, if you follow the ballistic trajectory back from where such a thing would have happened, to show where the bays are all the way from Nebraska to New Jersey, most concentrated in the Carolinas. If you follow that back and back out the rotation of the Earth and do all the really complex math, you end up at Saginaw Bay. Okay, and Saginaw Bay is what makes the thumb of your state of Michigan.
Right.
Right? That's a very unique, distinctive feature that looks a little bit like an impact crater. Okay? So they thought that something happened there. Now, the interesting thing, just like Hiawatha, or to some degree, depends, might depend on how much ice is there, exactly what the impactor is made out of. If this was a disintegrating comet, we can talk about that. You can have some parts that might be iron and more solid, and there might be some parts that are more friable and loose. Okay? But something slams into 2 miles of ice, maybe it doesn't make a traditional impact crater below the ice. Maybe it just gouges it out like Saginaw Bay looks.
Gotcha.
Right? So these guys kind of thought that. Here's what happened recently, that it's a big planet out there, and the internet's a wonderful thing because there are always people, if you got a kooky idea and there's something to it, somebody might actually prove it.
Yeah, jumping on board, baby.
Yeah, using technical equipment. And a bunch of, I can't even pronounce the guys' names, genius scientists in Czechoslovakia who are absolute experts on gravity anomalies, took some of the latest gravity equipment in the world and did a treatment on Saginaw Bay. These guys had already applied it and been published multiple times doing it at known impact craters around the world. And the gravity anomalies showed distinct, almost target-like patterns, if you will, above well-known craters around the world. They're completely accepted. So they had already proved this is a cool thing to go see. It helps confirm craters. It might tell us more about the craters that we already accept, but gravity anomalies are a part of it. So these guys went and took a look at Saginaw Bay, and boom, it looks like a damn target. Looks like an archery target. Not quite that good.
The whole bay, or like, is there any land? Is there
hundreds of miles into Michigan?
Oh, okay.
It's something incredibly energetic.
And is it different physical? Is there different physical evidence? Like, how the glaciers supposedly cut out where the Great Lakes are and everything. Is it different in that spot than it is the other spots?
Yeah, if I get your drift right, it's always, not only that, no, you're right. You're onto something there. The Saginaw Bay is so anomalous. When you're trying to put together the whole glaciers caused everything.
Yeah.
That Randall Carlson, amongst others, have pushed back against many years and said, look.
Right. Well, even if it was a glacial dam burst and that carved out, whatever it is, I'm just saying, is it different?
But Saginaw always required a special workaround. They call it the Saginaw Lobe.
Gotcha.
It had 2 big ice sheets, and then a little one snuck in right between and went and dug out Saginaw Bay. Then why it cause gravity anomalies that match up like the Rees Crater in South Africa and, rises in Germany.
Who's onto the Saginaw thing? Is Randall onto this stuff too, or is this something that you're primarily just dealing with, or?
No, it's a guy named Michael Davies.
Okay.
His website is centos.org.
Okay.
CINTOS. And he has absolutely nothing to do with the Younger Dryas boundary hypothesis. He even claims that the event that he believes caused the bay was 780,000 some years ago.
Okay.
It gets complicated. Just like you were saying earlier, even people that are generally on the same team, and he's not even on this team, but maybe we're in the same league or
right,
end up disagreeing amongst themselves because there's so much mystery out there. So, but Davis is non-credential, but I highly recommend centos.org to look into the Carolina Bay phenomena, be it, caused simultaneously, or not. It's a great field of investigation.
So, what's the takeaway from all this? Like, where are you currently at with this whole thing? Are you as convinced as you were 20 years ago? Are you more convinced, less convinced? Obviously, I know we talked about the Hiawatha. That might play a role in that. But hypothetically, let's say they find something that says it's older than the 13,000-year marker, or it's different than what you expected. Where do you go from there? You just keep looking for these impact sites and hopefully find the smoking gun?
Any kind of information that undermined it or supported us, as long as I personally believe it, and that I respect believe it. So, it's like the Carolina Bays. I am completely comfortable if that doesn't have do with space, even though it probably personally embarrasses me or people could look at it that way. With the Younger Dryas Impact hypothesis, I have even, I just want the truth. And I don't think that a lot of people are looking for the truth. They're trying to defend what they think they know.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So, yeah, you could have negative information come out, but no, I've never been more optimistic about that thing. After 23 years of involvement with this cold period 13,000 years ago, it is absolutely on the brink. It's even over the brink in some respects. When Science Magazine, when you run a blog called the Cosmic Tusk, and then my tagline is exploring comets and asteroids, exploring abrupt climate change induced by comets and asteroids during human history, right?
Right.
That's my gig. And Science Magazine does a full width of video, news story that I just wanted to give you the headline. I should have had it handy if I was going to do it. The headline, and y'all should go to read this, is, massive impact crater beneath Greenland could explain ice age climate swing.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you're
Right.
exploring the black climate change induced by comets and asteroids, and then Science Magazine saying it. Hey, man, it's been a good year. I mean, it's a great year. Now, is my son coming home from, 7th grade earth science and saying, hey, Dad, they were talking about your theory today. They actually mentioned you as being the guy in Raleigh who was in on the beginning of the, great theory. That maybe that day will come where there's some kind of explicit, wow, I was involved.
Right.
Hopefully.
Or maybe even it's not personally, but hopefully other people will get that kind of thing. There'll be some good movies and stuff like that. But it is so satisfying to see it now, as much as, it's like kind of like politics, where as much as you hate the New York Times, if you're a Republican, it's great to have them agree with you.
Right.
It's in the New York Times. Well, the last 10 months, everything the Times said you trashed, but until so that's kind of our thing with science. You despised them up until the moment that they capitulated to the evidence and now are running great stories on it. So I think there's, these things run in years. Nothing happens fast in it. Literally the distance between our papers can sometimes be 2 or 3 years. So you got to give these other guys time to get up there to Hiawatha. But there's increasing evidence elsewhere. We find, there are researchers around the world finding the black mat and finding catastrophic forensic evidence at 13,000-year-old sites around the world, contacting us all the time. But
I wanted to ask you too about the that Siberian impact. I mean, that wasn't that long ago, I don't think, but it had a weird effect and blew all the trees and
that's right.
So have they ever looked in? I think Siberia is huge too. Is there ever been any look over there as well? Because I feel like there could be a lot of stuff hiding under there, over there.
Yeah, but that's not the interesting part about the Tunguska impact. Yeah, there certainly could be impact evidence in Siberia. Certainly all the mammoth died, so something happened over there.
Right.
Right. And Hiawatha wouldn't be the only impact crater either, necessarily. Our theory is, and the Hiawatha team at this point doesn't agree exactly with this. They say it was a single iron asteroid that came slamming into, a lot of reasons that's probably wrong.
But you think it's like the torrid bringing multiple objects.
And that thing's disintegrating, and you may have hit a cross section of that stream where you could have had multiple impacts over a period of a day or two. So they could be anywhere around the globe.
Right.
To some extent. And so what would something like Tunguska, what's the relevance there? Well, one is that you can have tremendous effects. Is it enough? We needed Hiawatha. At one point, we were interested in, or the lead authors were interested in, we had to reserve the possibility that all of this was atmospheric impacts, that you hit a swarm of 50-meter boulders that all blow up like Tunguska and you got 5,000 of them. Will that change the climate?
Sure.
Maybe. And are you going to see any craters? Absolutely not, because Tunguska didn't leave a crater to speak of. So that was always on the table. But you figure, it's probably not going to be all gnats. There are going to be some gnats, some bumblebees in there, some flies and different size, that swarm.
Could an explosion like that, though, could it spray these microsphericals and diamonds and all that stuff, or would an impact need to happen for that to occur?
Both are possible.
Okay.
You both get vaporized impactor material when it blows up in the atmosphere, like Tunguska. They found spherules there.
Okay.
Also, when there is a truly energetic, gigantic monster impact that slams into the earth and melts the crust, right? It shoots up stuff that also vaporizes.
Gotcha.
And you can't always tell whether the spherules you're studying are generally a mixture of them with a hell of a lot more earth in it than remnants of the thing. But there's enough remnants of the thing to have those spherules test extraordinarily high in elements like platinum, which is our signature thing. There's a big paper in 2015 that got in Nature, the other big journal. We'd never been in Nature. This one made it in Nature. So
Yeah.
that was us. That wasn't just the Danes.
That's awesome.
Danes got the related science into science. But in 2015, we were doing Snoopy dances, or I was, for getting it into Nature. And that was discovery of a widespread platinum anomaly at 13,000 years ago. Right? So I am preparing, to answer your question, I am preparing to dance joyfully on their grave for the rest of my years. I'm only 52. I probably got a good 30 years of absolute just dancing on their grave, calling out the idiots, making sure they're held account for their foolishness, which is going to be a lot of fun, over being wrong about this. And I think that's going to be clear within, a very, very short period.
That's awesome. I mean, hopefully, something big soon comes out, and at least
hopefully you don't go missing soon.
That's right. I hope not. Well, I'm going to get on to see that football game.
All right. Well, yeah, we're going to let you go so everybody can check out the end of the Super Bowl here. But thanks for coming on.
Yeah, great, man.
We're going to get you. We're going to get you back on soon. Check out his website, thecosmictusk.com. We're going to put it under our information, and it was a pleasure, George.
Yeah, and on Twitter too, doing a lot of stuff on Twitter.
Cosmic Twitter at Cosmic Tusk on Twitter too.
And another great portal for related information that is more editorial from the entire group is the Comet Research Group website. Comet Research Group. We got 3,000-4,000 friends there now. We post frequently on it and keep people up with things to do with the Younger Dryas research.
And that's cosmicresearchgroup.org.
Comet Research Group on Facebook.
And how many? You had 60 something scientists now, I believe.
Yeah, it depends on how you count them. If you added up everybody on a paper, it'd be in the 70s, probably.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, cool. You don't know who to. There are a lot that you don't want to say are a part of the team because then they wouldn't be independent, right?
Right.
So what happens when someone discovers something that supports us? Are they now one of our team? Yeah. A little hard to parse.
You got to figure out who's going to be top 3 for the.
We got 70 people that have published evidence in support of this. Yeah.
All right. Well, this was awesome. Lots of information, lots of good stuff. I appreciate you coming on. Everybody, check out the end of the Super Bowl, and thanks for watching. Peace.
Cheers.
Thanks a lot.